Hello and welcome, I'm Tafaragadamu. Daniel Gold lost his mother in the Holocaust while he and a few cousins narrowly escaped. He was barely 7. Why is it so important to remember? I'm also joined by Belaynesh Zevadia, the ambassador of Israel to Ethiopia. Professor Daniel Gold, Ambassador Belaynesh Zevadia, a very warm welcome to the program.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
I mean, all happened when you were 4 years old, right? It started when you were 4 years old.
Yeah, but I went during 3 years, I went through it.
What happened? What do you remember of that time period?
I remember being withdrawn from a very comfortable surroundings, a well-to-do family, over average income, good life, very good parents. I don't know whether I was a spoiled child or not, but I had a comfortable life and I didn't miss anything. And all of a sudden, in comes a huge army, fear, terrible expectations, and then being taken from my comfortable surroundings into a ghetto, living the whole family, each family living in a room, in a rundown house. My parents no longer have any belongings, becoming slave laborers for the Germans. And us children, most of the time, most days, being alone in either in the houses. We were allowed the first 2.5 years outside of the house. And playing maybe one with the other. We didn't even have any toys at all. And just wandering in the streets and trying to play one with the other. In the houses, hardly anything to do for small children. No tuition, no kindergarten, no schooling, nothing.
So all this in a ghetto, right?
Inside a ghetto, yes.
When was that? Which year was it? 1940?
Summer 1941.
In Lithuania?
In Lithuania, when the Nazis just swept through the Baltic countries on their way to Russia, to USSR.
And then 4 years later, what happened in
1944, that's 3 years. In 1944, the ghetto was liquidated. But myself, with some family members, not my parents.
Your cousins and your aunt, right?
My cousins and my aunt, yes. My uncle too, but he didn't manage to escape with us. He was caught and captured, and he managed somehow to extricate himself and escaped later on. But my escape was with my aunt and my cousins. And then that was a few days without knowing exactly what was going to happen and when the liquidation would take place. We managed to get out of the ghetto and be hidden in a farm far away from town, underneath a house, in a kind of a hideout that was really a kind of a ridiculous hideout, where we didn't have even space to sit down or stand up. We could only lie there. A very restricted area. And they're lying without being able to communicate. They had to be very quiet for 4 months, living from nightfall to nightfall. During those days, we had no space, we had no food, no drink, and only when dark fell, we managed to crawl out of the house, underneath the house, and get some food, and of course go to the toilet. Then the next 23 hours back to the hideout.
So you were essentially living with Lithuanian peasant family, right?
Yes, you could call it with. I call it underneath the parents.
Yeah, of course. But in a way they sheltered you, right? I mean,
they sheltered us. That's right. But not. They got payment for it.
So This is not an unusual story.
Yes, it is one of the mankind couldn't believe that it will happen here in Europe. Europe is, the developed country, and, these people were killed not by animals, not by monsters. They were killed by ordinary people because they were Jews, and it happened 70 years ago. It's history just to dismiss all the Jewish people in the face of Europe. That's what happened. That's what the Germans did.
It is quite revealing that when the ghettos were demolished, you managed to escape, but then your father and your mother were taken to the concentration camps, right?
Right. They thought that they still had time to make arrangements to find a hiding place. It was very difficult to find among the hostility that was around us. The Lithuanians, the ones that actually massacred 80% of the Jews around them, living with them, that they would be willing to hide Jews, even for payment. And many of them, as you intimated, actually in the beginning were ready to do it, hid them for a few days or a few weeks, and afterwards they turned them in to the authorities. So they actually caused their death indirectly, maybe. But you were giving the extreme times when I entered the ghetto and when I left the ghetto for escape and hideout. But within that time, in 1943, was a horrendous occurrence. It was called the liquidation, or as the Germans called it, Aktion, they called it, an action, the purge of the children of the ghetto. And for me, it was the most terrible day in my life. I managed, again, with my cousins, to hide in a cellar, and they didn't find us, miraculously, I must say. But the fear, the helplessness, the fear, and the emotions, the exodus, that we were the whole day in the very restricted area, standing like sardines, perpendicular sardines, standing in the cellar without air, and also extricating. You had to urinate, and some of them defecated even in our clothes. All that is something that I really can't describe as a normal day in my life. It was terrible. Mainly the fear.
And your parents were moved to the concentration camps, right?
In 1944.
In 1944.
Yes.
And then you reconnected. You met your father. When was it? In 1950.
I had notice of his survival in 1945. And we were reunited after my escapes from Lithuania in 1946. So 2 years, when I escaped, it was my separation, my final separation from my mother. And it was a 2-year separation from my father.
And then you never heard anything about your mother. And it took you some time to live with that dark reality of the death of your mother.
It was a very, very bad period for me emotionally.
I mean, the father survived, the mother died. He doesn't know when she. I
didn't even know whether she died. She died. Nobody told me.
No.
There were no witnesses, and there was no actually indication. Maybe there were, and they wouldn't tell the small boy about the death of his mother. Yeah, so I don't really know whether there were any witnesses. I tried to somehow to find out. I never could. I don't know how she died and when she died.
And the pain was so much there. You didn't give up, so much so that you didn't want your father to get married again.
I didn't want him to get married again because in the fear that my mother would reappear, and then she would find my father married to another woman. So it took several years until after coming to Israel that he met another woman, a Lithuanian widow from another ghetto in Lithuania, and they married. And that actually, I was already 17, but it was my first home that I got, my first family after losing my family.
I mean, there are plenty of stories in Israel where so many widowers and widows moved on to Israel. You grew up reading those and being taught in schools about those stories and so on, right?
There are so many stories like this, but we are delighted to have Professor Daniel to come here and to tell his story. It's a very sad story, but it can teach people. That's what the survivors do in Israel, to teach their story. Things never happen, never again. What happened to the Jewish people in Europe will never happen in any place in the world. That's what he was teaching us today. He told his story. A 4-year-old boy, just until this day, he doesn't know where his mom died or not. These stories, they have to touch us. So that's what I'm listening to them. I was telling to Professor Daniel that I met one lady when I was in Houston. She was a survivor from Hungary. And I was sitting, I want her to tell me more and more how she survived without food, without anything, without family. You know, it's something that we need to teach. So these survivors are going around the world and teaching their story. We have to teach this. We will never forget this story. So I left Ethiopia in 1984. Since then, I just learn more and more. And I visited Germany. I visited concentration camps. So, yeah, we have to learn from it.
What was the moment like when you first met your father? After 2 years, you met your father in Munich.
I met my father in the train station in Munich, where he was waiting.
Waiting for you?
Yeah. Now, one of the cardinal questions that came up, and I wasn't clever enough to ask questions my father while he was alive, because I wanted really to push away my memories of the Holocaust, is how did he know when I would be coming? I had been for 3 months in Poland, and communication was almost impossible after all. Certainly there were no cellular phones to call each other. And so I can only assume that he had some kind of vague idea when within several weeks I would be coming, and he went to the train station each day to await the trains coming from the east. And on one of those days I came, and that of course was unification. Of course he was overjoyed.
What was the moment like?
Very emotional.
You didn't ask him about your mother?
Not on the spot.
When did you ask him that question?
Much later.
How far later?
I wanted to maybe to have the time a little bit for us to be together and maybe enjoy each other, and only later I started to ask questions about it.
That he had no answer for?
He had no answer, no. He had no answer, and I'm not positive about it, but I think he also didn't give me a definite answer. He knew that she hadn't survived. He was probably trickling slowly. He was trying to filter the message in. It took a long time for me to really absorb it. That was an interesting meeting. As I said, very emotional. But my father was very hurt from the Holocaust, from the loss of everything, all his background, everything lost, including, of course, his wife and most of the family. And he actually never recovered. I, as a young man, later on was able to overcome it. I think that my father was always on a level of very, very sadness. And of course, he cared for me, and he cared later on when he married, he also cared for his wife. But he never really got out of it. He was never a merry person after that.
When you travel across the world and talk about the Holocaust and your story, what do you get out of it? Does that give you some kind of relief or brings memory back and becomes even more painful?
I feel a reward if I get across. If
The
I
message
can
across.
really relate to the people that I'm talking to. And in many cases, I really feel personal interactions with the people. And that's my reward. That's the only thing I get out of it.
Is that
And
what
of course, to get the message across, that's very important. I want to leave a message. Not my own glory or something. I want to leave the message that people survived and were able to recapture life. And of course, my being an Israeli, having been a pilot for 30 years in the Israeli Air Force, as long as I could physically protect my fellow citizens, I was happy with it. And later on, hardly the only thing, but the only thing that I could really, later on, at my later age, do for that purpose was talking and relaying and giving the right messages about it.
You had this
Yes.
function where he gave a talk, which you organized. What did it bring? I mean, this conversation.
The United Nations declared that 27th of January will be the Holocaust Memorial Day everywhere in the world. This is our fourth year to do the Holocaust Memorial Day here in Addis. We want the Ethiopian people or the diplomatic community to know about it. That we have to commemorate this day to the Holocaust, the 6 million Jews who were killed by the Nazi. So
1.5 million of them children.
Yes, exactly.
And one of the very few survivors happens to be our guest here.
Yeah. So we wanted the world to know. We will never forget this. This is the history of the Jewish people. We will talk about it. Now, I'm sure Professor Daniel's kids will speak about it. We have so many, there's 3 generations already talking about the Holocaust. In Israel, we teach kids to know about it. Now we start everywhere in the world. We teach in Rwanda. Here in Ethiopia, we start to communicate with people. We recommend them to visit the Holocaust Memorial Museum in Israel. There are so many documents there. So this is something that we need to teach people. That's why we have to bring it here to Addis and to people to know.
So what was the reaction like from the people over there who were participating?
So many ambassadors, maybe 30 or 40 ambassadors, many of them from Europe, which it's not new for them. But the African ambassadors, for example, I saw South Sudanese ambassador, I saw Ghanaian ambassador. We want them to take this message to their countries also, not only here in Ethiopia, but to take it to their countries. Because we would like to reach every corner of the world to teach the Holocaust.
This seems to get repeated over and over again in different parts of the world. So are people listening? Are we, is the world better off today? It apparently is not. It keeps on repeating itself. So what do you make of that?
In Europe, so far there isn't any, or hasn't been in recent years, genocides. But anti-Semitism is on the rise. And I'm afraid that both things that happen now is that the people getting more extreme than they used to be in the past, in the years after the war. I had been for a month's talk in New Zealand. I talked to any audience that you can think of. Christians, Jews, schools, boys' schools, girls' schools, churches, universities. And from time to time, they had Muslim students there. And, on the gross, when you look at it, then they are very hostile. But some of them came to me after my talk and asked some questions. And I explained some things. And they understood. It was a one-to-one talk. And despite the propaganda against us all the time, they understood that black and white is not the only color in the spectrum. So I think that I make some kind of impact. I don't know how big it is. I don't know, but I'll try as long as I'm able-bodied. For the time being, I am. I will continue doing it.
And today is your 80th birthday. Happy birthday, by the way.
Thank you.
We have to give out the message. If not everybody is understanding, some people will understand. Killing people doesn't lead to anything. The only thing that we can improve the world is by teaching people, teaching them the good things, the technology, the right things about health, about education. That's what we need to do. That's what will change the world. But we have to teach. History is our base. We have to tell the story and to go forward, to teach the people other important things at the same time. So that's what will come out from here. Look at Israel, came out from this dark time of Holocaust, building the country, and one of the leading countries at the World Economic Forum. Israel was the number 2 startup nation, which is a huge accomplishment. Israel is only 68 years old. So we have to work at the same time, not to forget our history, but to teach the good things.
So it boils down to education, basically, right?
By the way, we have teachers, educators coming from all over the world. And the most astonishing for me were Chinese and South Koreans that came, teachers, educators, came to Yad Vashem, to our memorial museum there, to study. They have, I think, 3 weeks of a seminar to study about the Holocaust. And the culmination of their visit is not a confrontation, it's just a meeting with survivors. And you cannot imagine the love that comes from those people, the understanding and the love. And so I think that I come across, and I think that those people that are educators, perhaps they'll spread the word. It's very important. They also have immediate contact with Israeli society. And it's very important because about China has been now absorbing a lot of high tech from Israel. And it's not only technology, it's also important to know the relations between people. And educators are a very strong anchor for that relationship. I think that we do a good job in talking and trying to convince people that we are not the devils of the world, as you might assume from what goes on in the United Nations, and that we really want to help. You have here witnesses that they go to Africa, they go to Far East and other countries also, irrigation and high-tech and whatever.
Well, thank you very much for sharing your thoughts. It was a pleasure having you on my show. Thank you very much indeed, and happy birthday again.
Being with you.
Thank you so much.